We're now going to put the steering system of the X4 together. It's a steering system which is fairly similar to the one on the T4, but it has some notable differences. First of all, the steering arms that are included are now the aluminum version, which is the preferred version and is used by the team for all conditions. So at first we're going to install the bearings into the steering arms. It's really tight. But only on one side. Just put the bearings in on one side because we are going to install these little shims in between, which remove the radial play inside of the steering. So we put these shims inside of the steering arm in between the two bearings. Put the bearings in there. So always put these shims in before you put on the outer bearing. When that is done, you can put them on the little steering posts. Make sure they have free movement. Same goes for the other side. You need to keep in mind that steering arms are now in the other direction compared to the T4. So the whole steering assembly has been lowered, which means that the high part of the steering arm goes upwards and not downwards. So it's a different orientation of the steering on the X4. I'm gonna give you a little tech tip here that you can use these optional aluminum shims. Aluminum shims and screw all in one from XRAY. They are a real nice optional part which you can install on top of the steering assembly here to remove the radial play. And these just simply go on there. I'm actually gonna install them on my car now. Put these on here, we tighten this part down. The same for this part here. Put these optional screws on top of the steering arms. The steering arms are done. And then we're gonna proceed to install the steering bridge to the arms. So the steering bridge now goes on top of these arms, not at the bottom like on the T4. So what is important here is to add a little bit of thread lock to the aluminum part to prevent the screws from coming loose. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of thread lock there. This is medium strength thread lock that I'm using. Add a little bit to the aluminum part there to prevent them from getting loose. Steering bridge goes in this orientation, so this extension here goes towards the bottom. Put the screw inside and we simply tighten this down. Make sure you have free movement here. Same for the other side. Screw first. And we can add a bit of hoodie bearing oil to to these small bearings as well. And to the bearings in the steering itself. And we're then gonna install the short steering link to the center of the steering. I'm gonna use this short ball cap here, ball stud, sorry. Put this at the center of the steering. Actually, we're gonna use the Hoodie multi-tool for this ball cap installation. It will be a lot easier. So what we do is we put this ball stud on here, on the multi-tool. And then we just... I got the wrong one. We're gonna use the bigger diameter one, because these smaller diameter ones are for the smaller ball caps, which go onto the steering assembly. So this ball cap goes onto this ball stud here. It's easy to install with the help of the multi-tool. Then we install this short steering link to the center of the steering here. No shim needed. And then steering links, as I explained earlier, these have a smaller diameter ball stud required because they are smaller ball caps. The reason why they're smaller is that they need to have clearance to each other when they're sitting on a steering rack like this. So again, we're going to use this fantastic tool for these ball studs to go into the ball caps. It's one done. Next one done as well. So for the initial setting for the Ackerman, we're gonna use no shims, which will give you quite a lot of Ackerman, so it will make the car easy to drive. If you need to increase the steering of the car, you should add shims to the steering rack between the links and the steering. This will reduce the Ackerman effect, which will make the car more difficult to drive, but it will increase the steering of the car. So in this case, no shims for our initial setting. Steering assembly is put together. You then have the option to use the included Servo Saver or optional servo horn on the steering. Servo Saver has the benefit of saving the servo in case of a hard crash, so you don't damage your servo. But the benefit of the servo horn is that the steering will be a lot more direct and you'll have more high-speed steering, which is especially important for high levels of competition. But if you're racing on a club level, I can really recommend using the servo mount because it will save your servo in case of a crash. But the team drivers often use the Hoodie servo horn. This is the clamp type that I have here. And it means that it's clamped down by a small screw, so it's fixed in 2 places. But there's several different versions available from Hoodie for all types of servos. So we're gonna install this ball stud on the servo with 4mm of shims. It goes in the top hole of the Servo Saver. And then again, you can just push this ball cap in place here. And that's it. The servo Saver and the steering assembly is all put together. And is ready to go on the car. Another thing which is important to install on the steering is the steering lock limiting shim, which now installs from the bottom of the steering. And what I mean by that is that you install this shim at this spot here. The included shim is a 7.5mm diameter shim, which limits the steering lock to approximately 26 or 27 degrees of steering lock. But if you want to use more physical steering lock, you can purchase the optional 7mm of diameter shim, which will make it possible to use more steering lock, more physical steering lock on the car. And if you don't use this shim at all, if you leave it out, you can achieve up to 30 degrees of steering lock, which is the maximum. But we generally don't recommend using that much. We recommend to limit the steering lock to either the kit setting, which is 26 or 27 degrees, or to use the optional 7mm diameter shim, which gives you up to 28 degrees. We don't like to use any more steering lock than that, because it will just slow down the car in the corner and it will really be hurting your cornering speed. So those are my suggestions for the steering lock shim. Let's talk about how to adjust bump steer on the X4. The bump steer is, as you may know, is adjusted by shims on the steering block. And as you may remember from the T4 platform, you were adding or removing shims from underneath the steering block. But on the X4, the steering arm is the other way around. So the shims are added towards the bottom instead of towards the top. So you have to think in reverse order as to what you're used to. So removing shims from underneath this point on the steering block, on the extension of the steering block, removing shims will increase bump steer, which will make the car more aggressive, more difficult to drive, and more prone to traction rolling. So whenever you need more steering, you need to lower this point by reducing the shimming. And on the other hand, if you need to make the car smoother, if you need to take away steering, you need to raise this point up by adding shims. You need to go higher, which will decrease the bump steer effect. You'll have less bump steer. And that's it really. I mean, it's very simple. The kit setting is a very neutral setting, which works for a lot of conditions. But you need to go lower, especially for asphalt racing, if you're looking for more steering. So that's it. That's the bump steer on the X4 explained. In this segment, we'll talk about the servo mount and the steering system setup on the X4. In front of me, I have the servo mount put together with a servo. And what's new on the X4 is that the servo mount that comes with the car is reversible. So you can flip this plate around, as well as this aluminum piece, and you can mount it on the back side of the servo instead of the front. The way it's mounted now on this servo is with the screw holes to the front, which means that we have the forward servo mounting position. If you flip the plate over and you move this aluminum piece to the back of the servo, you'll then have the rearward servo mounting position. The difference between those positions is rather big, because you move this mounting point on the chassis from the front to the back. So the flex point is moved from the front to the back of the car. The initial setting is the rearward mounting position, which is the most neutral, and that's what I recommend for racing on high grip, especially on carpet. But for racing on asphalt and low to medium grip carpet racing, I recommend the forward servo mounting position because it will give you more front end grip. It will make the car more flexible at the front part of the chassis, and you'll get more mechanical grip that way. So let's put this servo into the car, and then I'm going to show you how to set up the steering system. As you can see here, I used forward holes in the chassis. Just gonna plug this in here. Okay, we have everything there. I'm just gonna get my radio. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is you need to install the servo horn onto the servo. And what is important here is to switch on the car. And then make sure your steering is reset on your radio. Put your sub trim, your steering trim and everything to 0. And then we put the servo horn onto the servo, like that. And it should not be completely straight. It should be sitting at about an 11 degree, not 11 degree, at an angle of, imagine that it's a clock and it's 11 o'clock. So a bit like this, pointing towards the center of the car. That's the basic position that I use for the servo horn. So it's pointing toward the middle of the car. And to get the complete equal geometry, you can actually install it at 90 degree angle, like it's described in the manual. But this method that I'm showing here, it works perfectly fine for me. And this is now installed. We're gonna put the servo horn with a screw. Tighten this down. I'm using the clamp horn, so it's also fixated with a small screw from the top here. Okay. Let's remove the wheels. And we're gonna use the hoodie setup station for touring cars, these setup gauges, to set up the steering. So what we need to do here is we need to make sure that the steering links are the same length, left and right. For that we use a caliper. You're aiming for around 26 millimeters of length here, but we need to fine tune it for when we're setting the toe. Okay, so we turn this on here. As you can see, it's not centered, so we have the option to either shorten the servo link a little bit or adjust the sub trim to move this towards the right side so that we can center the steering. In this case, I'm going to adjust the sub trim a little bit so that I don't have to adjust the length of the steering link. Okay, we get this close to the center. Just a bit more. Okay, my toe is around 1.2 degrees per side, and since the steering links are the same length, I'm happy with that toe setting. So they need to be the same length, and we should have the same amount of toe here. If not, you need to either adjust the length of your servo steering link or adjust the sub trim on your radio. And as you can see, servo horn is pointing towards the inside of the car. At 11 o'clock, as I explained earlier. Okay, so the toe out is set. Now we're gonna set the steering lock. And this is very important to have equal handling between left and right. So we check the EPA on radio. We turn this first to the left. Okay, you can hear that it's binding up. It means we have too much steering lock to that side. So let's turn it up until you have a free moving steering link on the center, and that you can measure the steering lock. So in this case I have 27 degrees of steering lock, which is about as much as you can get with a standard shim to limit the steering. Let's check it to the other side. Here we actually have only 26 degrees. We're going to increase the EPA to the right. Just a bit more. And again, make sure that at full lock that the steering is not being bound up. It cannot be putting excess load onto the steering because it will not be free and it will affect the flex of the car during cornering. So now we have 27 degrees. To both sides. Same amount of steering lock to both sides. The steering links are the same length left and right. Servo horn is pointing at 11 o'clock. And nothing was binding up in the steering at full lock. So all these important points are to be remembered when you set up the steering on your X4. And that's it.